Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, November 15th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. UN committee says that Israel is committing genocide. So on Thursday, a report published by a special UN committee said Israel's actions in Gaza are consistent with the characteristics of genocide, while Human Rights Watch also released a report saying Israel was committing war crimes and ethnic cleansing. The UN report, released by the UN Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices, said Israel has used criminal means to achieve its military goals, including the use of starvation as a weapon. The report reads, quote, "This included intentionally causing death, starvation, great suffering, and serious injury, using starvation as a method of warfare, and intentionally directing attacks against civilians," end quote. The committee, which was formed in 1968, also discussed the occupied West Bank, where it said Israel has an apartheid system of injustice. The report said the, quote, "killing of and serious bodily or mental harm caused to Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are violations under international law," end quote. So the Human Rights Watch report that came out focused on Israel's forcible displacement of Palestinians in Gaza. The report said, quote, "Israeli authorities have caused massive, deliberate, forced displacement of Palestinian civilians in Gaza since October 2023 and are responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity. There is no plausible, imperative military reason to justify Israel's mass displacement of nearly all of Gaza's population, often multiple times." In response to the reports, the U.S. again denied that Israel was committing genocide, referring to the genocide label of Israel's military actions. State Department spokesman Vedant Patel said, quote, "That is something we would unequivocally disagree with. We think that kind of phrasing and those kinds of accusations are certainly unfounded as it relates to the humanitarian situation," end quote. Of course, they're going to deny genocide because they're the ones funding it, supporting it, enabling it. When asked about the Human Rights Watch report, Patel claimed that, I mean, this is the most absurd thing. He said that the U.S. has not seen forced displacement in Gaza. I mean, since the beginning, they've been forcibly displacing Palestinians. And now we're seeing in northern Gaza, they're doing this ethnic cleansing campaign, displacing people, and then destroying all the buildings in their wake. And the Human Rights Watch report focused on, the buffer zone, the Netzarim corridor, where they've destroyed all the buildings there, completely leveled everything. And Patel says the U.S. hasn't seen forced displacement. I mean, it's a complete joke. And this follows a pattern of the Biden administration just denying the reality on the ground in Gaza. And the reason why they do that is to ensure that the weapons can continue to flow. They're violating all these U.S. foreign assistance laws if they admit that Israel is committing genocide, ethnic cleansing, all these other war crimes that could threaten the weapon supply. So just this has been the pattern, denying the reality in Gaza and giving the Israelis the weapons to carry out these atrocities. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces killed 24 more Palestinians in Gaza in 24 hours. So Gaza's health ministry said Thursday that Israeli attacks killed at least 24 Palestinians and wounded 112 in the previous 24-hour period as Israeli strikes continued across the Strip. Strikes on Thursday included an attack on a school in Gaza City that's sheltering Palestinians who have been displaced by Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign in the northern cities of Beit Lahia, Jabalia, and Beit Hanun. Israeli troops have been forcing civilians to leave the cities under the threat of death, but Israeli strikes still target the areas where they tell them to flee. So they've been telling, in Beit Hanun, which is where they've been focusing on lately, expelling people, they've been telling them to go to Gaza City, and they're bombing Gaza City. They're bombing the shelters. So this is Hind Kudari. She's an Al Jazeera reporter, and she said, quote, all of the people who were in this school came from Jabalia, Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, and this is not the first time the Israeli forces targeted the school. This is the fourth time the same school has been targeted, end quote. She said that it was unclear how many were killed and injured in this strike, which means the casualties were not counted in the numbers from the health ministry. So you see this picture here. These are people who were killed in Deir el-Bala in central Gaza. Strikes were also reported in central Gaza, where at least 4 were killed by an Israeli drone attack on the Burej refugee camp. At the Al-Aqsa hospital in Deir el-Bala, a 1-year-old boy died due to the lack of supplies as a result of the Israeli siege. A reporter in Gaza, Hani Mahmoud, said, quote, a 1-year-old boy has died in the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital here in Deir el-Bala in the past half an hour, despite his case being treatable, according to the doctors we spoke to. Due to the lack of medical supplies, the hospital could not do anything to save him. This is part of the silent death that is happening on an hourly basis in the Gaza Strip, end quote. Israeli strikes were also reported in southern Gaza, with 3 killed east of the city of Rafah. According to the health ministry's latest numbers, the latest violence brought the death toll since October 2023, the death toll that they've been tracking, to 43,736, the number of wounded to 103,370. As we always mention, these numbers only take into account dead and wounded Palestinians who have arrived at hospitals and morgues. And Dr. Feroz, who I interviewed, these American healthcare workers who were in Gaza, by looking at the data, they estimated that the minimum of those actually killed is around 118,000, and that was last month. So a lot more people have died since then. And they're looking at, they're taking into account the people under the rubble and also the starvation deaths, other indirect deaths caused by the Israeli siege. All right, so the next one here, blood mixed with flour as Israel kills Palestinians receiving food. This article's from Middle East Eye. This is a pretty brutal story. Israeli forces killed several Palestinians seeking food supplies in the Gaza Strip's so-called humanitarian zone earlier this week. Rescuers and relatives of victims told Middle East Eye. The deadly airstrike had struck a tuk-tuk vehicle near an aid distribution point in the Mirage area north of Rafah. Disturbing images from the scene show victims' blood mixed with flour on the floor. Ziad Farhat, the director of rescue teams in Rafah, told Middle East Eye, the area where the people were hit is within Israel's so-called humanitarian zone, which is supposed to be safe for displaced people. He said, quote, from what we are seeing as rescue teams, there is no such thing as a humanitarian area, end quote. Mohammed Abu Armana, a journalist volunteering with Gaza Civil Defense, said the road where the strike took place was regularly used by civilians traveling between Khan Yunis and Rafah. While the civil defense repeatedly warned people against heading to Rafah where it is too dangerous, some still go to check on their homes, Abu Armana said. Israeli forces killed at least 400 aid seekers in Gaza earlier this year in various airstrikes and also bombed aid distribution centers. They have also repeatedly forced people to flee to certain zones with the promise of safety before bombing and killing them in their makeshift tents, or like we saw in Gaza City, the school that's sheltering displaced people from these cities. They just kicked them out of. All right, so the next one here, at least 20 killed as Israel strikes Damascus. This article's from Jason Ditz. Israel continues its seemingly endless escalation of airstrikes against their neighbors today, hitting the Syrian capital of Damascus with multiple strikes. At least 20 people are reported killed and 21 wounded so far, with the toll not finalized. So this is a big strike. 20 people dead. That's a lot when it comes to Israeli strikes in Syria. The airstrikes targeted the Maza neighborhood, which is home to embassies and government offices. Israel commented that the strikes attacked an office belonging to Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Maza. The initial report was 10 were killed in those strikes, including at least 3 civilians, and then strikes in another area killed another 10 people. That strike hit an apartment building. It was further reported, but not confirmed, that among the Palestinians said to be staying in the building were several Palestinian Islamic Jihad members. A PIJ member was anonymously quoted as confirming that among those killed were several of its members. It's not clear what the operational impact might actually be. Israel's claiming it's a significant blow against the group. PIJ is a much smaller group than Hamas, but it has been involved in the fighting against Israel in Gaza. So this is Syria. I mean, it's been every day, I think, for the past week or so, that Israel is bombing Syria, and the U.S. bombed Syria at least twice this week. So things are really heating up over there. All right, the next one here. Israeli attacks on Lebanon's Baalbek kill at least 21. This is another one from Jason. At least 21 people were killed and 27 others were wounded as Israel carried out multiple airstrikes against different civilian targets in the major eastern Lebanese city of Baalbek. The larger of the two strikes targeted the Baalbek Civil Defense Center, so they bombed the rescuers again. That was the main area in which rescue workers organized in the city. 12 people were killed there, and at least 5 rescuers were among the slain. This has been a reoccurring thing with Israel strikes against Lebanon. They've disproportionately targeted large numbers of paramedics and other rescue workers, whether attacking medical centers or hitting rescue workers as they attempt to pull people out from previous strikes. And then earlier in the day, Israel attacked a 2-story residential building in the Al-Shab neighborhood. 9 people have been reported killed in that strike, and the number of wounded has risen to 27. So again, the heavy Israeli airstrikes continue in Lebanon. The next one here, Netanyahu aide discussed Lebanon with Trump and Kushner. So the Washington Post reported that Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer, who's a close aide of Netanyahu, held talks with President-elect Donald Trump and Jared Kushner at Mar-a-Lago this week. So this report, which cited unnamed Israeli officials, said Dermer's message was that Israel was looking to give Trump an early foreign policy win by reaching a ceasefire in Lebanon by January. However, when you look at Israel's conditions for a ceasefire, they're non-starter for Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. The big thing is that they want the freedom to conduct military operations in southern Lebanon, and they're just not going to agree to that. An Israeli official told the Post, quote, "There is an understanding that Israel would gift something to Trump, that in January there will be an understanding about Lebanon," end quote. Another Israeli official said that there were also plans in place to ramp up the Israeli ground operations in Lebanon if a deal is not reached. The inclusion of Kushner in the talks with Dermer and Trump signals that he may have a role in the incoming administration, even though reports have said he ruled out the idea. The Post report said that Kushner could play an advisory role if there are negotiations to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. When Israel escalated its war in Lebanon in September, Kushner expressed strong support for the offensive, calling for Israel to finish the job. And it's rare that Kushner, it's been rare since the end of the Trump administration that he makes kind of public comments like this. But you could tell he was very happy with what Israel was doing in Lebanon. He wrote this very long post on X. This is just a portion of it. He said, quote, "September 27th is the most important day in the Middle East since the Abraham Accords breakthrough," and quote, it's amazing he says that was the last most important day, was the Abraham Accords. And September 27th was the day Israel killed Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. Kushner said, quote, "Anyone who has been calling for a ceasefire in the north is wrong. There is no going back for Israel. They cannot afford now to not finish the job and completely dismantle the arsenal that has been aimed at them. They will never get another chance," end quote. So again, if he's going to be advising Trump on this, that's not a good sign. Trump also expressed support for the Israeli offensive in an October phone call with Netanyahu. Senator Lindsey Graham, who was on the call, said Trump expressed, quote, his awe for their military operations and what they have done. He told them, do what you have to do to defend yourself, end quote. A Lebanon ceasefire deal that's been floated by the U.S. would involve Hezbollah moving north of the Litani River and the Lebanese army and UN peacekeepers taking their place in southern Lebanon. But Israel wants its military to have freedom of action in southern Lebanon so it could enforce the deal, which is a non-starter, again, for Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. Nabi Berri, the Speaker of Lebanon's parliament, said this week, quote, is there any sane person who believes that we will agree to a settlement or a solution that serves Israel's interests at the expense of Lebanon's interests and sovereignty, end quote. A person close to Hezbollah told the Post that Israel must be prohibited from conducting operations within Lebanese territory. And while we have seen Israel just pounding Lebanon with airstrikes, they did take out a lot of Hezbollah's leadership. Hezbollah is still able to put up a pretty serious fight on the ground. Israeli troops have been taking pretty heavy casualties. Since September 30th, at least 47 Israeli soldiers have been killed fighting Hezbollah on the ground. All right, so the next one here is interesting. Elon Musk met with Iran's UN ambassador. So the New York Times reported on Thursday that Elon Musk, who's an advisor to President-elect Donald Trump, met with Iran's ambassador to the United Nations on Monday. The report cited two unnamed Iranian officials who said the discussion lasted over an hour and was about how to diffuse tensions between the U.S. and Iran. The Iranian sources described the meeting as positive and good news. The reported meeting has not been confirmed publicly by any side. A Trump spokesman said when he was asked about it, quote, we do not comment on reports of private meetings that did or did not occur, end quote. If you remember recently, the Washington Post had a report saying Trump spoke with Putin and Russia said it was fiction, that it didn't happen. And then Trump's team said a similar thing, made a similar statement about it. But if this is right, the Iranians leaking it or telling the New York Times about it, Israel's not going to be happy about this if they think that Trump's looking to diffuse tensions. And Musk has been close to Trump since he threw his support behind him during the campaign. And he was reportedly involved in a recent call with Zelensky. And Musk's SpaceX has played a pretty crucial role in Ukraine's war effort by providing the Starlink terminals and services. So this New York Times report came after Trump announced most of his foreign policy team, which is completely stacked with Iran hawks, and Trump took a hard line against Iran during his previous administration with the so-called maximum pressure campaign, as we've been talking about a lot lately. And Trump's top cabinet picks, including Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, they want to return to maximum pressure, and that's what Israel expects. Israel is saying that they expect the U.S. Trump to take a harder line on Iran. Israel Hayom reported on Thursday that Trump's team is actually preparing to, quote, topple Iran's regime, end quote, saying that they're preparing for regime change in Iran, a policy that would, guarantee war between the U.S. and Iran. So this is Israel Hayom. So I think, there's different factions here among this Trump team. Again, it's completely stacked with Iran hawks. Then you have kind of the wild cards like Elon Musk, like Tulsi Gabbard. So the Israel Hayom report, I kind of read it as them trying to kind of put out a narrative here because there wasn't really any detail. It said, they're going to try to do regime change, but they didn't say how or anything. And then this Israel Hayom is published. It was started by Sheldon Adelson. It is published by Miriam Adelson, the widow of Sheldon Adelson, who gave Trump $100 million to encourage him to pursue extremely pro-Israel policies. So we know this paper is going to try to influence this incoming administration to be as hawkish on Iran as possible. So keep that in mind. And then, I'm expecting the Trump administration to be bad with Iran. Waltz, Rubio, these people are total Iran hawks, and the Senate and House controlled by the Republicans. But for Iran's part, they are making it very clear that they're willing to talk. And I think that they're going to sit back and see how this next administration is going to be before launching any more attacks on Israel. It seems like they've cooled down the rhetoric on saying that they were going to respond to Israel's latest attack. But I think Israel is going to try to start another cycle of escalation maybe if Iran doesn't do anything, because, especially if they see this report in the New York Times that there's a chance Trump might be looking to ease tensions with Iran. That's why if I was these Iranians, I would not have gone to the New York Times about this meeting. I would have kept it quiet. Because, seriously, I wouldn't be surprised if Israel pulls something in response to this report. Netanyahu, I bet, has notifications when a new New York Times report is published. Whenever there's anything published by the New York Times about him or Israel, like a few minutes later, he puts out a statement on it. So he's definitely seen this, All right, so the next one here, evidence is... I left up the one from yesterday about the shaky evidence for the so-called Iranian assassination plot against Trump. Definitely go check that out if you didn't listen yesterday. It's just important that it is just a totally bogus story. All right, the next one here, Israeli minister says no voting rights for Palestinians in the West Bank. So the Israeli Minister of Settlements and National Missions, Orit Strak, has said she's working to ensure Israel can annex as much land in the West Bank as possible during the incoming Trump administration, but said the Palestinians that live there don't have rights to the land and shouldn't have the right to vote. She said in an interview, quote, "My office is working at full throttle to ensure that if sovereignty is applied, it will cover the maximum area possible," end quote. So she was asked what will happen to the Palestinians living in the occupied territory and responded, quote, "All people have human rights, though the national right over the land belongs solely to the people of Israel. They can stay here as human beings, of course, and to be a Jewish state, we should grant them full human rights in my view," end quote. When asked to clarify what rights the Palestinians would have, she said, quote, "National rights over this land belong only to the Jewish people. I think a model needs to be found, but they shouldn't be able to vote for the Knesset, right?" End quote. So, they don't want to absorb all these Palestinians and give them a vote. And she's also saying that the national rights over the land belongs only to the Jewish people. So that means the Palestinians won't have any sort of property rights or anything, like they don't now. They constantly getting thrown out of their homes, getting their buildings destroyed and everything. So that would obviously continue with annexation. So these settlers, Israeli settlers they think this is really their moment to annex a good portion of the West Bank. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. opens I skipped one. Investigators assess if Netanyahu aides forged October 7th phone records. So this is more about that. There's been these reports about Netanyahu people working in his office, blackmailing an IDF officer to forge the record from October 7th. So this article is from the New York Times. On the morning that Hamas raided Israel last year, a top Israeli general called his prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to tell him that hundreds of militants appeared to be preparing to invade. Now, aides to the prime minister are under investigation for altering details about that call in the official record of Mr. Netanyahu's activities that day, according to 4 officials briefed on the investigation. The investigation is seen as deeply sensitive in Israel, where the question of what Mr. Netanyahu knew in advance of Hamas's invasion and when he was told could prove crucial to his political future. It is expected to play a key part in a post-war assessment of the role political and military leaders may have played in one of the worst military failures in Israel's history. The accusation is just one of several leveled at Mr. Netanyahu's aides in recent weeks. While Mr. Netanyahu himself is not a subject of a police inquiry, officials in his office are under investigation for trying to bolster his reputation throughout Israel's war with Hamas by leaking classified military documents, altering official transcripts of the conversations, and intimidating people who controlled access to those records. So there's a few different things here. There's a few cases. Case one is the phone records. On the day that Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, the prime minister spoke frequently by phone with senior security officials, including with his military secretary, Major General Avi Gil. And remember, one of these conversations is him being told, hey, it looks like they're preparing for a big attack here. And then what happened? They were still not prepared for it. Police officers are assessing if aides to the prime minister secretly changed the record of those phone calls, according to the 4 officials briefed on the investigation. Then case number 2, an embarrassing video. The forgery case has been compounded by fears that an aide to Mr. Netanyahu intimidated a military officer who controlled access to the phone records, according to 4 officials. The officer was filmed on a security camera installed in the prime minister's headquarters, committing an act that could cause him personal embarrassment, the officials said. And then they approached him and said they had the video and, that you should change the record. That's the accusation here. Case 3 is a leaked document that was leaked and altered to foreign news outlets to bolster Netanyahu's narrative about hostage talks. That was to sabotage the hostage talks. So it seems like there's a lot here. And again, I mean, the October 7th, I've always said and thought that the possibility of them kind of letting the attack happen so they could use it to justify what they're doing in Gaza is certainly possible. They had all sorts of warnings that something was coming. Gaza is one of the most heavily surveilled places on earth. Israel's intelligence capabilities are very robust, as they've shown, killing, I'm blanking on his name, is Haniyeh, the Hamas political chief who they killed in Tehran, but they couldn't see that an attack was coming from Gaza, so this is more evidence, I think, pointing in that direction. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. opens Provocative missile base in Poland. This one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. After nearly 2 decades, President George W. Bush's plan to put Aegis ashore missile system in Poland was achieved this week. The system is capable of firing offensive missiles and is viewed as a serious national security threat by Russia. The base is located in northern Poland near the Baltic coast. So this is a big ballistic missile defense system, similar to what they have on U.S. Navy destroyers. You can see the picture. That is what it looks like. Kind of looks like a ship. But this system, anti-ballistic missile system, which was made possible by George W. Bush, withdrawing from the anti-ballistic missile treaty, it uses the Mark 41 launchers that they use on U.S. Navy destroyers, and those launchers can fit Tomahawk missiles, which under the INF, which was the treaty that banned land-based intermediate-range missiles, a land-based Tomahawk system would violate that treaty. So this is something Putin's always had a big problem with, and now it's finally open. Of course, the U.S. has pulled out of the INF, and they are planning to deploy missile systems to Germany that would have violated the treaty, but this is just more adding to the tensions with Russia in Europe. All right, so the last one here, Sudan war deaths are likely much higher than recorded. This article's from Reuters. I'm always been meaning to cover, more stuff about Sudan just because it's just such a horrific war over there. But this with antiwar.com, this show, our focus is on conflicts that our government is funding and involved in. So we've just had our hands full with that. But this war is just doesn't seem like it's ending anytime soon. So there's this new report putting the death toll much higher than they thought. So more than 61,000 people are estimated to have died in Khartoum state during the first 14 months of Sudan's war, with evidence suggesting the toll from the devastating conflict is significantly higher than previously recorded, according to a new report by researchers in Britain and Sudan. The estimate includes some 26,000 people who suffered violent deaths, a higher figure than the one currently used by the United Nations for the entire country. The preprint study by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine Sudan Research Group, released on Wednesday before peer review, suggested that starvation and disease are increasingly becoming the leading cause of death reported across Sudan. The estimated deaths from all causes in Khartoum state were at a rate of 50% higher than the national average before the conflict between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces erupted in April 2023, researchers said. The UN said the conflict has driven 11 million people from their homes and unleashed the world's biggest hunger crisis. Nearly 25 million people, half of Sudan's population, need aid as famine has taken hold in at least one displacement camp. But counting the dead has been challenging. Even in peacetime, many deaths are not registered in Sudan, researchers say. As fighting intensified, people were cut off from places that record deaths, including hospitals, morgues, and cemeteries. Repeated disruptions to internet services and telecommunications left millions unable to contact the outside world. The study tried to capture that invisibility using a sampling technique known as capture-recapture, one of the authors said. So, and I think this is what most people have suspected, that the real death toll is much higher than what the UN has been putting out. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ramsey Baroud, voting against genocide, how Gaza defeated the democratic establishment. One from David Stockman, Trump's Hegseth caper and the delusion of peace through strength. One from Belen Fernandez, prepping readers to accept mass slaughter in Lebanese strongholds. One from M. Reza Benem, Israel unmasked by the slaughter in Gaza. And one from Doug Bandow, Trump must put Americans before foreign partners. So please go check all of that out. This is the last show for the week, so I hope everyone has a good weekend. You could always support this show, like, subscribe, comment. All that stuff helps out. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Instagram. I will be back in a few days. Again, have a good weekend. I will see you on Monday. Thanks for listening.